Dr. Turai, we are going to start in a minute because our head department just said that he is joining. He is still checking his sound and also video. So once he is joining, we can start.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, no, I can hear you.
Are we starting now?
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Mr. Bayu, our head department, is joining
It's
now.
coming. Mm.
But he's still checking his video and also sound. He said that he is in the Zoom. He is in the waiting room. I think. Okay, Doctor,
Yeah.
we can start because our head department, Doctor Bayu, is joining us in.
Okay.
So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening in Indonesian time and good morning in Indian time. We are very delighted to have Dr. Satu Raino with us and also our lecturers, the head of department, and also Dr. Natsuka dan Mamoto are joining here with us as well to discuss about the Atlantic slavery and the impact to modern American and African societies.
Mhm.
Here with Dr. Troy from the University of the Gambia. So
Mhm.
before we start our discussion, here as in Jakarta, especially in the Universitas Indonesia campus, we are having students in our school, particularly managing a postgraduate school. Okay, that's the short introduction from our school. Maybe later we can talk about our school. Now it's time for welcoming remark from our head of department. So I would like to allow Pak Bayu Kristianto to deliver your remarks. So the place and time are yours, Pak Bayu.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Mas JJ. I hope my voice is clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Professor N. Sature from the University of Gambia. Thank you so much for joining us in this a very interesting opportunity of the mini discussion with a very interesting topic. Yeah. So again, welcome to uh, School of Strategic and Global Studies, American Studies Department. Even though you are here online, but we still somehow welcome your presence with us. Yeah, especially to deliver a very insightful topic. Yeah, and I also would like to welcome all the students of the American Studies graduate program who are taking the class now. The class is the Society and Culture of the Americas. Yeah. Now
Mhm.
the a few sessions now is being taught by Mas JJ. Yeah. I will be teaching later in the last, I think, last 5 sessions of the class of the course. Yeah. So again, welcome to all the students as well as all the participants of this mini discussion of this occasion. I would like to welcome you all, and Ibu Retno Mamoto also here, who was also a former professor or teacher in the department. So welcome everybody. Yeah, we appreciate your presence here in this interesting discussion. Yep. And I would like to thank Mas JJ as well, who has arranged and coordinated this event so that we can have Professor Sature from University of Gambia and the students of the class, as well as all other participants who have been present with us. Yeah. So I would like to just share a story about my interest in African American history. I remember before taking my PhD in Native American Studies, my initial plan was at the time to take the second major, or the so-called maybe the minor. I wanted to take a minor in African American Studies at the time. Yeah. So I came to UC Davis in 2010, and I had that in mind. So the major would be Native American Studies, and the minor would be African American Studies. Yeah. So, however, somehow when I told or informed the graduate program coordinator about that, she offered me to take the so-called designated emphasis in African American Studies, which I couldn't do because then I would have had to do some other, necessary administrative stuff. I had to change my concentration. Yep. So things like that. So I decided not to do that, not to take that, and I decided to learn on my own. Yeah. So starting from semester one, I started to learn a lot. In addition to learning about the Native African history, I learned a lot about African American history. Yeah. So that was one of my biggest interests, is also in African American studies. It's focusing especially at the time in the US. Yeah. So I learned on my own, and I learned a lot of these very interesting stuff within the African American studies, like of course Black Power, Black Panther. Yeah, as the one prominent, of course, subject is civil rights movement in the U.S. back in the 1950s, in the 1960s. Yeah. So some those big figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam. Yeah, and Black Christianity, and then Black womanhood. So those are some of the interesting things and topics and figures within the Native African American studies that I learned on my own. Yeah, but I continue learning about that, and then I learn about Kimberly Crenshaw, like with the concept of intersectionality. Of course, that was because of the role of one prominent. Let me turn off my phone. Yeah, a very interesting scholar, African American scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, they came up with the concept of intersectionality, right? That was one of the biggest concepts that I also took advantage of in my dissertation. Yeah, I remember some of the movies I watched, like Roots. Yeah, that was so popular back in 1970s in the US. Yeah, and of course, some of you may have watched Amistad and then Beloved, right? And also one of the most recent ones, like 12 Years as a Slave, Django Unchained. So I consume a lot of movies on African American history and studies as part of my own learning of this very interesting subject. Yeah. So of course I learned about how slave trade happened. That at the time, the beginning of the slave trade in Africa, the dynamics between African nations and tribes and communities at the time, and that was taken advantage of by European slave traders that would bring all these people from Africa to different nations, different European nations, including the Americas, right? Yeah. So in places like the Caribbeans, Brazil, um, perhaps Mexico, the US, of course, right? All these places in the Americas took advantage of the Atlantic slave trade. Yeah. Of course, then that will result in, with the development of American slavery, resulting in the Civil War, the war against between the North and the South, right? One interesting things I also learned is about the fact that Islam also was brought to America by the slaves. I remember a story of an African prince, right? A Muslim African prince who was so adept at Arabic, so
Mhm.
schooled in Arabic language, but he was not able to speak English. But he was a scholar. He was a scholar. He was a Muslim scholar. Yeah, or he was treated as a slave until one time the slave owners and the officials at the time discovered that he was actually a prince and he was a gentleman. very highly educated, right? And then I think if I can recall correctly, he was transported back to Africa. All right. So those are one of some of the things, major things that I can remember from memory, learning about the African American history, of course, in relation to African history as well. Yeah. So now it will be interesting to learn about slavery and the transatlantic slave trade from a scholar. Yeah, and a scholar in African history, Dr. Ensa Toure. He's the right person to share with us his insight and to educate us on the topic of transatlantic slave trade from the perspective of the African people. Yeah. And in connection with the book that Mas JJ has assigned all the students to have read for this discussion, Jeremy Black in The Atlantic Slave Trade in World History also emphasizes the different dynamics of slave trade, of slavery in different areas of the world, different contexts. Yeah. And also one interesting emphasis that he makes in the book is the idea that if you think that slavery, the history of slavery is the past, that's wrong because it remains with us. The history of slavery is still with us. Yeah. We cannot get rid of our mind and our awareness because it remains with us. It remains relevant in the contemporary era. Okay, so I guess with welcoming remarks from me, I would like to give the opportunity to Mas JJ and then to Dr. Ensa Toure to start the discussion this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Bayu, for the very warm welcoming remarks. Because right now in Salemba it's very cold since the raining outside, and some of students are also trapped in the rain. But thank God they are also joining through the Zoom, and we are very helped by this technology right now. Here with us also a lot of our Indian friends who are joining with us seen in the screen. We welcome you guys to join our mini discussion today, and very honored to have you all, and also to all of our students. That actually what I wanted to talk before I present this discussion is actually been said by Pak Yusuf. Thank you so much, Pak. You have delivered this of the book as well, and also what we are going to discuss. But allow me again to introduce Dr. Elsa Turai, students and also participants in the discussion today. So Dr. Elsa Turai is
Yes.
Gambian. He is right now working for the University of the Gambia and stay in Brikama City, if I'm not mistaken. He is married and also already have status of the professional or the lecturer in the African history. And he earned his PhD since 2020. He is also working for a lot of schools and also institutions, not only for the university but as well as for the other institutions. He also a young lecturer in the International Open University, led by the Professor Bilal Phillips since 2014 until 2021. And his previous work is his courses is African global history, history of the Gambia, problems in the history of the Gambia and political institution and government in pre-colonial Senegambia. And he done a lot of field trip in roaming around in Africa and also having professional experiences as a historian and also a scholar and also registered as member for some professional bodies. Without further ado, I would like to give this opportunity to Dr. N. Saturai to give this lecture and also material for our discussion today. So the time and place are yours, Dr. N. Saturai.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody around there. And I say good morning whilst you are in the Gambia. Thank you, and I appreciate your invitation to give a lecture on this very important history. I know that the slavery remains in our memory. It is important that I always suggest that reparation for Africa should not be a case. But once it is in the memory, and then the people will learn a lot and foster global a pathway to see how interracial reconciliation could be fostered. My lecture today is on African slavery and transatlantic slavery and its impact on the American and the African society. We need to understand that understanding the background of the slavery, we need to look at the global system analysis. Once we don't actually situate the context of Atlantic slavery within the framework of global system analysis, people will keep on blaming one another and not understand and that how actually we're going to conceptualize it effectively. Can you hear me very well?
Yes.
Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
If you have PowerPoint or slideshow, you can share it.
Uh,
If you have, maybe if you have a slideshow or PowerPoint, you can share through your Zoom.
yeah,
But if you
right.
can,
I am not using any projector here.
it's fine.
I send you those topics. I'm going to limit my lecture uh, within the based on the topics that I sent to you. I think I sent those to you.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yeah. So first of all, I am going to look at the Africa before the Atlantic trading system, to look at the Iberian beginnings or before that. And then the second under that is going to be Africa and the Atlantic trade. When we talk about Atlantic trade, doesn't mean that everything about Atlantic relation is actually centered on the slavery. The slavery came after when there was already a global demand by the European capitalist nation in the New World. So that is why we look at Africa before and Africa and the Atlantic when there was no slave trade, but there was actually a commodity trade initially between Africa and that of European capitalist nations with their intention to actually come through Atlantic zone so that they could outflank the Arabs who were actually monopolizing the gold trade between them and Western Sudan. That also needs to be understood in context. And the third one is going to be a new world and the global shift in that of the 16th century. And that is when New World America was discovered for European capitalist demand, and then the need for response and how it actually catalyzed or accelerated the European demand for African human capital will also be discussed in my presentation. And the transatlantic slave trade and its impact on the societies in both Africa and America will be our discussion, and I will be able to. So these are the topics that actually I'm going to limit myself to. When we look at the Atlantic trading system, and we look at Africa before, how was Africa before the rise of European capitalist expansion? Was Africa part of the global system? Was Africa part of the globalization? Was Africa actually captured within the framework of global system where was Africa actually an active player in the global system? What form of world system that might have actually connected Africa to the world system? Was it actually, was 15th century the beginning, was the 15th century the beginning of globalization? Or well before the 15th century? Interaction and the linkages in terms of trade exchange between Africa and other parts of the world was going on. So the question for us to understand the genesis of the transatlantic slave trade, we must actually look at Africa before the time. We have to understand that Africa was an ancient area when it comes to both human civilization, and it is believed that Africa was actually was the supplier and was actually the cradle of humanity. The African people will believe that they established the first political civilization in terms of building politics in Memphis. That is when the first pharaoh established the first state in Africa, that is in Memphis in ancient Egypt. And from there, the movement started and the political capital or political power center shifted to Thebes, where the pharaohs established ancient and that of the more expanded empire system and politics. So we believe that with the Persian invasion, that marked the end of the pharaonic civilization, where people moved to Ethiopia and Sudan, and by extension, they moved down to West Africa, and through Sahara, we can say that owing to pressure on the natural resources, people started moving in the Central Africa, in the South Africa, and the Western Atlantic zone in Africa here. After that, we understand that Africa remains one of the greatest areas in the world system. And we believe that Islam came in the 6th century, in the 6th century. And Prophet Muhammad's emergence in Saudi Arabia and Islam, it actually generated a lot of conditions that we could actually felt and see in terms of transformation among the Arab people. Because Islam brought institutional system, policed by Sharia, where Arabs were actually harmonized, actually to upgrade them and build their capacity in humanity. That is one. And then it gave them this in terms of technology, and also intellectual orientation. And by extension, it gave them Arabs the opportunity to actually control the world system. In this situation, just to give you the background, Arabs were actually controlling the entire world system. So if you look at the world at the time, the Middle Eastern Arabs were actually the core powers. At the time when Western Europe was nothing in the world. How? Because we have to look at the multi-centric context here in terms of global control. The Arabs control Baghdad, an intellectual center. The Arabs from the Middle East control Jerusalem, an intellectual center. At the same time, spiritual center. At the same a transition to India and others. By extension, they control Egypt, where they control Nile, and they were able to produce food and supply food and so many things, wheat, barley, honey, and different food to European people. So at that point in time, Muslims were core powers of the world. By extension, they control Iberian zone, where they control Portugal and Spain, and they established Islamic theocratic state. So if you can understand at that point in time, Muslim civilization in the 6th century, from the 6th century down, it helped Arab to emerge as core powers in the world. And where we are coming now, the Arab and the Muslim control of Iberian zone, that is Portugal and Spain, it gave them the opportunity to actually subject the non-Muslim to slavery, especially those who deny to be converted to Islam, because already it is a Muslim theocratic state in the Iberian zone. And also Muslims were able to actually supply professional skills, because shipbuilding was actually inherited from the Muslims. And this is where the European nations actually learned from the Arabs in terms of shipbuilding, canoes, and whatever. So we can understand that subjecting the non-Muslim to slavery, for example, it has actually given them the opportunity to understand what is called the process of interdependence, and also slavery for that matter. So we have to understand, once Arabs were reconquered or conquered in the Iberian zone, we can understand that Portuguese people and the Spanish people were able to gain their independence. But when before that expansion, African states were already at its height, and the empire was actually established. When the Arab attempted, because Arabs were controlling the entire Middle East, they controlled the Iberian zone. In their attempt to move so that they could lay their hand on the African gold, control the gold mines as a collateral security for their political consolidation in the Middle East. The Arab moved into West Africa, and the West African people were very, very responsive and sensitive to Arab imperial attempt in order to loot resources. This is where African aristocrats, politicians, and state kings were able to actually come together to establish a regional consolidation that led to the creation of Ghana Empire. And the establishment of Ghana Empire actually led to what is called led to the creation of Pan-African states, which actually constrained Arab imperialism. They adopted state policies that subjected the Arab caravan to actually pay taxes, duties to the king and to the government. The government of Ghana controlled gold, and the gold dust was only meant for the Arabs. So this control situation actually constrained Arabs who were controlling the Iberian zone in Spain from getting access to gold in order to go and build the Muslim state. In the 11th century, the Arabs were able to establish monasteries in West Africa, where they were able to actually train Almoravids that conquered Ghana Empire, and the entire Ghana was actually destroyed. Mali Empire emerged, that actually control the entire West Africa. So we can say that when Mali controlled the entire West African zone, especially the Atlantic zone, from the 13th century down to the 15th century. 15th century, Mali withdrew from West African control, and then that coincided with the coming of the Europeans in the 15th century. So you have to understand the background of the coming of the Europeans in West Africa. In the 15th century, King Henry of the Southern Portugal was determined to explore beyond the boundary of Europe so that they could engage in capital accumulation in order to build their nation so that they will emerge as controller, they will emerge and attract and generate centers of economic and commerce where they will be able to attract people from different places. In their attempt, they built scientific schools at a place called Sagis, where they train European youths from different European capitalist nations, where they were trained in navigation, exploration, map making, different skills so that they could actually cover the entire maritime space and the distances in order to connect to the other part where they could actually tap resources to build their political economy in Europe. So that's where we have to understand that in the global system analysis, this is where we consider that the intervention of macro sociology. This is where we understand how technological sophistication and power could actually subject nation states a shift in terms of global control, and how it can also subject other nation states to the periphery of the world system. So Europe came as a result of the discovery in technology, invention in boat and the ships, and they were able to cover and they are able to actually challenge or conquer the challenges of the distance between Africa and that of Europe. This situation actually helped Europe to be interconnected, linked with West Africa. That is where we can understand that Europeans came through the Atlantic Ocean, where they came to Cape Verde through the Atlantic and the islands in Angoon and that of the island of other islands, James Island in the Gambia and that of Cape Verde. During this time, this is called Atlantic trade, but there was no Atlantic slavery when they came in the 15th century. The trade that was actually in place was called legitimate trade or commodity trade. This was not the trade initially centered on the human commodity, but centered on the non-human commodity. So we need to understand the Atlantic trading system initially in order to confirm African interaction, because there are two venues. Sahara venue that actually connect Africa to the East Middle East. The Sahara Avenue linked West Africa and Africa entirely to that of the Middle East. Atlantic venue actually connects West Africa to Western capitalist nations during the European capitalist expansion. So the interaction in the 15th century, initially it was actually based on commodity trade. Gold was what was actually demanded. But the European actual expansion, in order to build their political economy, to compete and struggle over the monopoly of gold trade against the Arabs, not so, was in the 15th century. It was through the Atlantic Ocean. That is why the trade is called Atlantic trade. But the avenue that was actually centered on Sahara, that actually linked West Africa to Middle East, it was called Saharan trade. So we need to understand that once Africa was actually connected to these two avenues, that is Sahara territorial and the Atlantic maritime, Africa became in the middle of the two international trading systems. Was Africa a periphery in that system? Africa was actually a co-player. Africa was co-equal, and Africa was an active player because nation states that were established in Africa, they had all the conditions relevant, all the conditions where they were able to actually, where they operate, and they had all the conditions to operate equally with the Middle East, equally with European powers. This was in the early 15th century. And what we need to understand at that point in time, when Mali Empire was under control, African popular mandate and democratic system was strong because Mali Empire was a constitutional state and was constitutional monarchy, where they actually generated and actually designed a constitution that will actually harmonize diversities in Western Sudan up to Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Senegal. That actually constitution was called Manding Charter or Westphalian Charter or Kurkan. This was the first constitution that was built. The British Magna Carta was drawn from the Mandin Charter or Kurkan. So we can understand African civilization when it comes to the political decentralization. Not only that, African state under Mali, it was actually people-driven government. It was not absolute monarchy. Sunjata and all the constitutional powers, constitution actually dictates the state policy, driven by the popular mandate of the people. This interaction between West Africa and that of the European through Atlantic is considered to be Atlantic trading system, but initially centered on the commodity trade, background of the Atlantic trading system. When they came down in Africa in the 15th century, they moved down to Cape Verde. In order for them to be, what were they doing? They were trying to locate a route down to Western Mali, which is in the interior. And the states along this West African coast were the only areas, avenue through which they will be able to reach the Niger so that they could outflank and redraw gold trade from the Sahara to the Atlantic Ocean. So in this situation, West African kings were not actually accommodated, especially the kingdoms in the Gambia, especially Nyomi, Badibu, and all other kingdoms. The first European to enter into West Africa, especially in the Senegambia region in the Gambia, was called Nuno Tostao. He came in the 1446. They arrived in the Gambia, but the king around Nyomi, around the coastal zone, fought against their entry. They repulsed their invasion, and Nuno Tostao was killed, and some of the crew members, confirming strong political condition in Africa, confirming strong political civilization in Africa, confirming that people were conscious of their control of the territorial and that of the land. Europeans and the Portuguese were killed, and they could not enter. But you have to understand, Europe at that point in time, they could not do anything in order for them to emerge from their economic downturn in order to supply food for their population. They had to move out. If not, it may lead to what we call malnutrition, starvation. So King Henry was still determined. And Alvisto Cadamosto, Dago Gomez, and other European traders were sent to Africa. But second time, they successfully met African kings in the Gambia. They signed treaties with them, and they gave them presents from Portuguese kings. That confirmed, and that marked the beginning of the European relation in the 15th century with West African states in the 15th century, where they were actually finding sea route to Timbuktu. They were given right and some guides where they followed the River Gambia, which is very, very important to any European trade. River Gambia started from the Atlantic Ocean in the west, down to the east in the interior. That actually enabled Europeans to actually seize the opportunity to move down to where to Niger in Mali. When they arrived in Mali, that was the time Europeans were able to outflank the Arabs, and they withdrew gold trade to the sea, which marked the decline of the trans-Saharan trader and the rise of the Atlantic trading system in the 15th century. So you can understand that in the 14th century, they arrived in the West Africa. In the 15th century, they signed treaty with the people, but the relationship was not centered on the human commodity, but centered on non-human and the commodity trade. So when we talk about Atlantic trade, we don't talk about entirely the initial stage. And know what happened. When they gave present to one of the African kings, who was very, very happy, he gave them human beings. He gave them human beings as present. The king of Nyomi gave them 10 people as guides, retainers, and they asked them to go with them to Portugal. That was why when Nuno Alfonso Cadamoso arrived with these Gambians in Portugal, King Henry was celebrating. He said he was going to convert these people to Christianity and gave them the knowledge of the Bible so that they could go back to people of the Senegambia and they will actually introduce them and actually bring them into Christianity. But the historical scholarship is silent on this matter after that. Although they sent a pastor because the king was ready to convert to Christianity based on European attraction of material materialism. And then what happened? They sent a pastor from where? A pastor from Portugal, from one of the monasteries of Santo, who established the first church in the Gambia around where Albreda, and that church they call it San Domingo Church. And this was established in the other. So you can understand the relationship was actually human at the initial stage, to the extent that they want to introduce Christianity to the Gambian, or monotheistic religion Christianity. But what happened? Historians are silent when you look at the historical scholarship and literature. None of the scholars talking about whether about the development and the growth of Christianity when actually this church was actually established and built. But we understood that many people are silent about that. But we have to understand one thing when we look at the change. In the 1492, Christopher Colombo actually discovered America. America for who? He didn't discover America as a zone for humanity. He discovered America for European interest. He discovered America for European capitalist demand and interest. I want people to understand this. When it comes to the discovery of the United States of America, Christopher Colombo did not discover America, and they were not the first people to people America or to supply humanity. Already, South Indian, Red Indians were there before the European people. They established two empires in America. Inca and Aztec were empires built by the Red Indians, and these were well-established, organized empires in America. So Christopher Colombo already found an established, organized politics or state in the United States of America in the 1492. But well before 1492, in the early 15th century, before 15th century, one of the heir apparent to the throne of Mali, the heir apparent to Mansa Musa, you heard about Mansa Musa, who traveled from Mali to Mecca with West African gold. One of the heir apparent called Abubakar, already West Africans were Islamized since in the 8th century. And Mali Empire became an Islamized state because the kings became Muslim and patronized Islam. So in that situation, one of the heir apparent to the throne of Mali, Abubakar, because Malians were studying what actually lies behind the Atlantic Ocean. They wanted to discover that. So that is why they were building boats, canoes, so that they could travel to actually discover what was actually lying behind the Atlantic. This marked the travel of Bakar from Mali before the European discovery for Europeans. And Muslim Africans were in South Carolina before the discovery by Christopher Colombo. Anthropologists, archaeologists were able to discover some of the traces or ruins of their mosque. Some of these things were even built in the Gambia here. So when we look at the genesis of transatlantic trade, so with the discovery of America by Christopher Colombo, and why? What was the discovery? Because Europe was actually trying to search for where they could get viable gold trading centers, where they could tap on the gold resources, where they could tap on different resources that could be brought to Europe and build their strong political economy so that they could compete with Arabs over the control of the world system. This has to do with the global system analysis as far as global system and globalization is concerned. So at that point in time, Africa was never a periphery of the world system. With the discovery of America in the latter part of the 15th century by the Christopher Colombo, here the discovery of virgin land, but it was a discovery to meet the European capitalist demand and the needs. He discovered America because America was very, very strategic in natural resources for European industrial development. That's where they call it discovery. But the discovery is not for Africans, not for it is not the discovery for Red India. So we need to understand that the context here, in the latter part of the 14th, 15th century, Christopher Colombo was already there. That marked the discovery by the Portuguese and the Spanish. We can understand that now, since Europeans established their colonies in the United States of America, establishing the colonies for what? Because, for example, Africa was never going out of Africa to actually colonize people. And what actually were the reasons for colonization? Because Africa never went out except in the Pharaonic during the time of Thutmose, who actually colonized the Jews and others, but in order to get labor to build what is called pyramids. Apart from that, Africans, after that Pharaonic empire, never went out in their attempt to colonize population outside African jurisdiction or continental zone. So it is important to understand the trajectory in order to situate the context of global system dynamics and see the background of the origin of the or genesis of the transatlantic slave trade. So this situation needs to be understood in this context. Here, when colonies were established, people established colonies because they did not have enough resources offered to them by the nature. By the nature, people who went out to colonize know that they still have some demands that could be actually be supplied to them so that they'll be able to actually accomplish their needs. Africa was the only continent at that point in time that was actually self-contained. Africa was self-contained because anything that actually humanity demands, any resources demanded by humans in terms of anything was actually embedded in African continent. In fact, the Quran, Bible actually established this. In the case of Joseph, he established that the people, Jacob and his children, were going into the ancient Egypt to buy grains. We all understand that, not so. And we understand not only that the Greek people were going to ancient Egypt to learn, Plato and other people build their education in ancient Egypt. This was the continent that was self-contained in terms of human and that of the natural resources. So Africa was no longer going out. Africa was no longer interested in going to actually govern people, to establish political control and hegemony in order for them to be able to dictate policies and authority, like what European people do. So the discovery of America and with huge resources discovered in America for European demand required the establishment of political hegemony in the West, in America. So that political hegemony led to the colonization by the Europeans. Now, what did they demand? What did they need in America? We have to understand now. What kind of demand? What kind of demand here? What did they actually demand? What were they demanding here in Europe? They needed gold. It was in America. They needed tobacco. They needed sugar. They needed so many raw materials. But the West Indian population in America could not provide labor demand, could not provide labor demanded by the European countries and capitalist nations. So which means that in order for them to be able to actually exploit American zone, to optimize their demand and the from America, they need excess labor. And that requires human capital from Africa. And they had to do what is called the geographic determinism. When we talk about geographic determinism, whereby they understood African ecology, Europeans study African ecology. First, they understand that most of the African nations understand who were rice producers. They were living along the coast in West Africa. And they were resistant to pestilence and environmental diseases like sleeping sickness, malaria, yellow fever. They were resistant to that. Since the American Red Indians in America could not withstand environmental to supply labor need for European colonies, Africa became an alternative zone where they will actually demand human capital. So you can understand that the initial stage, they wanted to humanize Africa by giving them Christianity. But you have to understand human being and his relation to economy. So that is why you can understand that once economy came to play or central in anything, especially when it comes to political economy, you understand that all other human standard factors will be set aside. And then what will happen? The end justify the means. That is why we said that inna Ya'juj wal Ma'juj mufsidina fil ard, where they don't understand whether, because this is capitalist era, nation state, we are moving out to ensure accumulation and attract resources to build their political economy in order to emerge as core powers in the world. So in their economic drive to attain more in America, they would not know whether Africans are human, whether God is there to, whether it is godly or not. That's why the Quran says, Inna Ya'juj wal Ma'juj, that is solely the Gog and Magog were destroyers on the earth. So this rise to the, that is, this led to the beginning of transatlantic slave trade, when the African human capital was needed. Portugal, England, and the German and other European powers forgot about humanity and religion. The Bible was actually set aside. And what happened? European demand for capital development and industrial development was actually what the priority for Europeans. So what happened? African human capital. And before they moved, you know that most of these countries were practicing Coptic Christianity. They had to consult their priests and their pastors about whether what the Bible says about slavery. In this situation, according to some, you have to understand that, in fact, initially in Italy, the Rome, the Pope had to actually release a papal authority to give European the authority, European the authority to enslave any part of Africa and Africans, or subject any African to servitude, especially those who do not believe in Jesus Christ. So you can see the genesis here. Go out where Anguin, island of Salvador, island of Anguin, all these islands, go and enslave the people as long as they reject the belief system and they reject Jesus Christ. They reject Jesus Christ as, or they are non-Christian. So you can understand the kind of terrorism at the initial level, which actually gave us the foundation of Atlantic slavery. So that is where initially African population were actually sent to Rome in Italy, and they served as what? They served as slaves, and they were subjected to bestial conditions. When African slaves died in Italy, they do not give them actually appropriate burial rituals. What they do is they throw them. They were thrown in the public pitch, at the public pitch, to confirm the status of black man. You have to understand. So when we don't accuse it, it was Pope who actually gave them the papal authority called Dum Dices, where he gave the papal authority to the kings in Europe to go out and enslave all the society. This political scientist, a popular political scientist, a British popular scientist, who actually talk about freedom and whatever, he himself was actually a shareholder in one of the slave companies. He described Africa in a very nasty situation. People need to reconceptualize Atlantic slave trading system. So now, European demand in America, in terms of human capital needs, to provide the required level so that they could actually optimize their demand in the United States, led to the actual demand for African human capital in the 16th century.
Dr. Turai, maybe we have 10 minutes left to for you to explain. Yes.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So in this situation, what they had to do, Africa before this phenomenon, for example, African states and empires were democratic states. They were actually operated according to the dictate of the people. So which means that King Sunjata Keita could not make any decision without the people. But when they came to Africa, especially in the Senegambia, the state of Kabul was in existence. Jollof Empire was in existence. Europeans came with their wealth, with their sophistication, and they actually collaborated with African kings. Now, African states from democratic system to predatory system. They actually arm and militarize African states. That is why we call those African states predatory state. So which means that now African states and government will be shifting from giving people the security. Now they will build their own aristocratic interests and build military sophistication to protect the aristocrats, instead of protecting the people. They collaborated with the European powers, and now they were given military power and opened the entire African population to vulnerability now. This African state became predatory state, where they militarized and they established some military structures that actually express their allegiance to the state leaders. Now the state leaders, owing to the benefit they were getting from the Europeans, they shifted allegiance to Europeans. They collaborated with the Europeans. Now they opened their people to vulnerability. So which means that now non-human commodities or commodities would not be interested. Human beings were becoming commodities of the trade in this trade relationship between Africa and the Western European nations. This led to the transatlantic slave trading system, and this is the background that we can give it to you as far as Atlantic slave trading system is concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Turai, for your explanation. We are very much happy, to have a very broad history course and also the impact to the contemporary societies. That maybe I can give a little bit resume for our students and participants who are actually joining us here in the Zoom meeting. So Africa is very known for the global market because it is placed in the very middle of the global trade system, since it is also influenced by the Islamization which came from the 6th century until the 15th century, where the actually colonization has started, and also being the part of the globalization itself through the human capital from Africa, that actually one of the global demand that time to develop and also making of the colonizations, as well as the Arab influence in the Africa, which actually brought the slaves from the Ethiopian and Sudan to the Gambian and also Senegal to the western side of Africa, and then being contributed to the Atlantic trade system from the Saharan trade system. And based on the materialism, the slavery in the Atlantic also happened. Such you give it is also impacted to the European society, that African, which having a great human capital, being part of the commodities that time, and also it is impacted to the American societies right now, as you have, as you give explanation that influence spread broadly in the America, not only in the North America, but as well as to the Latin America itself. So from the brief explanation that I have given to you and all the students and participants, I would like to invite to all of you to involve in this discussion and being discussion for the this event. So for me myself, I would like to maybe discuss with you, Dr. Turai, before maybe some other students who wants to ask or discuss. For those who want to ask or discuss, please click the raise hand button in the reaction, and we can spotlight you to involve in this discussion. So that I would like to hear your opinion about the integration of the African societies in the Latin America, and also the contemporary trend about the Black Lives Matter in the US especially. So what do you think about this kind of phenomena, whether in the Latin America and also in the US especially? So what do you say, Dr. Turai?
Concerning the integration of the black population.
Yes, Black Lives Matter movement in the US.
Sorry, can you explain again? Because
So I would like to ask you about the contemporary phenomena, especially in the US.
Okay.
There is a Black Lives Matter in the US, and also the integration of the African societies in the Latin America. Is there any differences or similarities maybe that happened about the African communities in in America.
Yes, what we need to understand, and if you look at the American trajectory, you understand that American War of Independence, where Americans white people in America wanted all the European colonizers to leave their continent. What happened actually, we understand, because this is where African skill and African talent were actually displayed. American white people wanted to isolate African people in the struggle for independence. And they saw that after attaining independence, they would ask black people who spent more than 3 to 4 centuries to leave America because they didn't contribute in the fight against colonization. So, but they could not actually defeat European colonial powers in the militant struggle for self-determination. Owing to that, black people actually participated in the war against, because already people who came from about seven generations in America, they could not be identified as African citizens. Their forefathers since the 15th century were there, and they consider America as their country, where their grandfathers and what their great-grand people were born. But a white man, owing to stupidity in terms of racial misconception, did not want to do anything with a black person. And that's why they wanted to isolate black Africans in the struggle against Europeans. And you know they could not do it alone because they could not do anything. When they were about to be conquered by the colonizers, that was the time they demanded African participation in the war against European colonizers. In this thing, African people, African slaves, slave origin, were able to display talent, and they became military power. They had the prowess in military exercise. They participated in the war. That's why the first person to die in the American War of Independence was a black man. I think Benjamin Bernard or whatever. He was given a state burial owing to his heroism in fighting to represent American nation. You can remember, and this was the time that human talent, human intelligence was not considered based on the color. So that you can understand the foundation of integration. And we understand so many intellectuals emerged, and they were writing. Booker T. Washington, so many intellectuals emerged, and they wrote a lot about humanity. Because what we need to understand, white people, especially Europeans, they believe in their intellectuals. Whatever they wrote, they believe in that. Charles Darwin theory, which actually placed Africans at a very as a low class human, actually perpetuated the belief that black man was nothing. But even the design, the physical layout of the Washington or the physical planning of Washington was done by the black man. So many discoveries in science or whatever. You can understand that even after American War of Independence, North and South, the integration process, you can understand that there was constraint. But we need to understand that African participation in the war and the African talent display in so many areas of human needs, it actually gave them the opportunity to be integrated elsewhere. And even the colonial wars in the Brazil, colonial wars in the other places, it actually gave them the chance and to actually consider that these people are human. We need to integrate them if we want to remain stable and in a stable atmosphere. So although it was a gradual process, it is something that has to be with human psyche. Before you actually obliterate it there, it will be a problem. But integration did not only come out of peaceful way, but it was out of militant form and out of demonstration of talent, demonstration of bravery, and so many things, and demonstration of nationalistic spirit that the black people saw more than the white man. They were ready to die to liberate their nation. America was their nation. But these people, because of the color, they wanted to consider them nothing. And they planned to even evacuate all the black people to create their own continent. But because of the needs and demand, and then the struggle by these people, there could not be any way. And already humanities and humanists were also writing. So this led to the incorporation. So when we talk about integration, for example, and we understand, so you can understand that even in the religion, they were able to understand a lot. That led to the rise of the creation of a nation of Islam, which did fundamentally, which actually they struggled and they succeeded in bringing African together, black African together through Islamic faith. And they were able to give their arguments on truth because and they believe that it's only Islam in the well, that would actually give them something in the next world. So black Africans were brought under the banner of Islam, and it was used as instrument for integration of black people in America, because they believe that already the misconception against black men is already in the psyche of a white, and the white man will never ever actually exterminate that. The only way, let's create our own pathway, and that led to the creation of Black Christian movement, Black Islam movement, Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad succeeded, and the Muslim nations recognized him, and they were able to build a strong dynamic and even standard, because they don't call them Sunni Wahhabia, they call them Nation of Islam, which is Ummah. That is that's what Prophet Muhammad said, my Ummah. Represent that. So these were all a part. It was actually a struggle for integration, not out of voluntary or not out of white man. No, there could not be any, because they are now exposed learning and whatever. So integration were going on until some of the areas in South and North America were gaining their self-determination and independence. Barbados got the independence not long ago with their prime minister, I think 2 or 3 years ago. Now they have their own currency, they have their own governance. So people are moving. So what we need here in Africa is, in Africa here, Atlantic Trade System also brought what was called spatial creation of spatial settlement, segregated settlement. Among the Fulani people, we call it Runde. The Fulanis have their settlement. I guess these settlements were established in Africa so that as long as they were selling slaves to Europeans, but they will also have some slave communities that will actually cultivate food in order to supply their internal dietary needs and labor. These communities are in Africa. You can understand that they also rebel against the communities that created them, and they rebel against. So you can understand that until when Islam came in its right form in Africa, they understood that humanity, Islam considered everybody equal. You can understand that here. So you understand it happened in Africa. Among the Mandi-speaking people, they call them Jonka Kunda settlement. And now people are sometimes they don't want to bury them together in the same cemetery. But people are fighting and intermarriages. But now Islam is coming. The Sunnis are talking about what is the equality before God. And now many people tend to accept what the Islamic doctrine is actually talking about. So you can understand the integration of slaves. Where I came from in Gunjur, our people fought against non-Muslims, and we introduced Islam in this cosmopolitan area or metropolis here. In our place, we don't know who is a slave origin. Even if they say, but the people intermarried, not based on genealogy, not based on birth origin. So you can understand integration is going on, but in Africa, because some societies in Africa, they entered in slave trade involuntarily, not voluntarily. I can tell you, they entered there not because in this thing, European sophistication and manpower and arms were given to the state. So if you are an African state, if you don't accept the arm to protect and secure your state, you will be open to vulnerability and your state will be destroyed. So some African state participation in the slavery was to ensure state survival. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for your explanation. Such a comprehensive, it's very enlightening us. And yeah, if there is students or also participant here who would like to ask or discuss, please raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button in the reactions. So, Dr. Turai, I also wonder how Gambian or maybe Senegal or Western African see the phenomenon of transatlantic. As you know, maybe like us Indonesian, we are being colonized by European powers for 100 years. You can say 100 years, and it is becoming. It was a scar for the for the early generations, but now it is such a only history for the early generations. Oh, sorry, for the later generations. So I would like to ask about the Gambian society perceive this phenomena, whether it is still becoming a scar, a trauma, or it is just a history that we have to move on from that. Please,
Uh,
Dr.
the, the sky is already there. The mark is already there, and it will not be easy to actually because Africa before these things. We don't know. Africa had what is called interdependence. That is mutual interdependence, and the type of servant-master relation in Africa, we call them in Wolof we call jamduru. Those who born a servant who born in the master's household. In this, people are actually given freedom owing to their economic needs and whatever they align themselves to master. But it was not very, very exploitative. People can go and work on their farm and they also work on the master's farm. But masters have to provide all the necessary basic needs for this person, which was not actually exploitative, but it was symbiotic. But with the rise of Atlantic slave trading system, we actually witness Africa being transformed from the democratic state system. This is the beginning of the rise of the dictatorial state in Africa. Because Mali, as a state under Sunjata Keita, Mali Empire, they were all democratic, they were protecting the people. But once slave trade came and European demand was actually raised in Africa, that was the time you can understand that. African state kings, they raised their own army that would protect them so that they could continue to get the benefit and materials from the Europeans. It led to the African undemocratic system. The state became very dictatorial against the people. When the state became very dictatorial against the people, it led to the rise of dictatorship in Africa. Even today, where people actually control slaves. And also today, it led to the mistrust, socio-cultural mistrust. Some ethnic groups, you have to understand in Africa, were centralized. They had their political kingdoms and states. Other societies in Africa, especially in the Gambia, they didn't have any state like Jolas, Manjakos. Sorry, Jolas didn't have any state, for example, and then you have the Serele, you have the Balantas. They did not have any kingdom, and they didn't have any king. They were actually non-centralized, and they were decentralized people. So once the Atlantic trading system emerged, what they do, they use their state machinery to go and invade these agrarian societies and capture their people, selling them into slavery. Today, after the slave trade, there is already a mistrust between the ethnic groups. For example, Mandinkas and Jolas never trusted each other. The Fulas and Mandinkas who were competing for slave trading never trusted each other. Our politics is ethnocentric today because the mistrust that was actually inherited from the history during the transatlantic slave trade. Internal mistrust among the ethnic groups. It led to that. And secondly, when you look at the whole thing, later part, when slavery was abolished and the peanut trade came, Europeans concentrated along the coast. It led to the migration from the hinterland to the coast, and it led to the urbanization, and African hinterland was actually abandoned, even still by the post-independent government. So you can understand. So many things you can understand. So, and look at that. When Europe shifted from the slave trade, they introduced peanut in Africa, for example, because they conditioned African people to go into peanut production and leave rice production. This led to African dependence on the capitalist market for their basic need, rice. And not only that, it also led to the environmental destruction because peanut could not be actually cultivated in the jungles in the forest. So African people who were actually conditioned to participate in the peanut production were forced to actually destroy their forests. And today in Gambia, there is deforestation, environmental destruction, except in Guinea-Bissau, where the national leader fought against the peanut production. Guinea-Bissau, 78% of their forest cover is intact. But in the Gambia and Senegal, who actually patronize peanut production, our entire environment in south and north completely destroyed. You could not see major jungles and forests or winter. And the rice production, rice was actually our staple food. Rice production actually diminished owing to our shift to peanut production as cash crop. So this led to Gambian to depend on the capitalist market, and it led our country to become periphery of the world system.
Okay, Dr. Toray, thank you so much for the explanation. So again, I would like to invite our students and also maybe students here who would like to maybe ask something to Dr. Toray. Yes, please, Mas Satria.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Dr. Ture?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. But I mean, the slavery for the African people should be making pain for a long time. So how the African people can heal, can get for that pain? Like right now, racism is still exists in the world. Maybe for the European, they some European they they say they are better yeah, than the African. So thank
African.
you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If you look at the background of racial supremacy, I think we need to go back to the ancient Egypt. Remember, because Moses was the colonizer. And you can understand that even the Quran said that it was because of the Joseph, Jews entered in the ancient Egypt among the black people. And the Jews entering in the black Africa found them in a condition that was in a wretched because they could not manipulate technology. They entered with sticks as safer, which means that technologically they were down, and Africans were the intellect and they were technological power. They were sent to live at a place called Goskan so that they would not actually interact or integrate with the black people. At that time, black was a symbol of power, symbol of superiority. So this is a continuity in human relation or interracial relation or interhuman relation. So those people were thrown there because they didn't have any knowledge. That's why they were, after when they built, they were the project of pyramids. When the architects brought it to the king on the top, and they asked him to provide them with labor. Where could they get the labor? He said, we will never use black person to be a laborer in the Kemet, in the black African land. Jews were enslaved for more than 400 years, if you could remember that. In the version of Abraham, and my children will be enslaved. Jews were enslaved for 400 years. And most of the technology and knowledge, they got it in the black Africa. That's why Joseph was trained in Africa. Joseph, his capacity was built in public policy, in public administration, in international trade and political governance. That is why people believe that God did not send prophets to Africa because the condition for humanity, it was already in Africa. That's why prophets were sent to wretched people. The Jews were enslaved for more than 400 years. We were behind all this knowledge in technology. If you want to know that, some of the pharaohs came from some tribes in Africa here in the Gambia. There were about Serere, one of the ethnic groups in the Gambia. They produced 4 pharaohs. They produced Frahona Sare, they produced Frahona Perbsen, they produced Osota Sen. These were all Senegambian tribes and these pharaohs. Come and see the stone circles in the Gambia. They were built according to the Egyptians. So you can understand that this memory of enslavement were in the minds of the Jewish people. I'm telling you about the concept of white supremacy, where it came from. They believe that when these people were actually enslaved Jewish people, they were nothing in Africa. African pharaohs didn't see them as wretched people. When the Almighty God brought a divine revolution through Moses, when Almighty God brought divine revolution through Moses to liberate Jewish people, I pay attention. How do you confirm that Jews didn't have any knowledge? I can tell you that when Moses brought them out of slavery and Moses gave them the guidance, instead of embracing Moses who liberated them, they followed the traditional Jewish religion, which is worshipping of the calf, confirming their what? Their ignorance. Confirming their ignorance about God. So when people say Jews were close to God, it's a lie, because after Moses liberated them, gave them guidance and 10 commandments, there was the end of worshipping calf. Is that not true? Which means that it confirmed their which means they were not civilized. They were wretched because they were pagan. Africa was already intact in religion and spirituality. But when the Jews also remember, they remember, it was in their memory, how black people enslaved them. And later it will be written in the history that black people enslaved the Jewish people. What they had to do is to actually destroy the Bible and actually inject something in the Bible to confirm that black people, the reason why they were black, because they were caused by the black father. They were caused by the black father, not so, either a North or whatever, who caused them, and their color changed into black. All these things was actually meant to obscure the history of Jew slavery. So you see the background. So that they went to the Bible and distorted that because they don't believe in Jesus. So that white man who are Gentiles will read it and believe that black man is nothing. So concept of racial supremacy of white started since at that time. Because the Jews do not want anybody to have the memory of their enslavement in ancient Egypt by black African pharaohs. In this situation, here they wrote it in the Bible that the black people were caused by their black ancestors. And the concept of white supremacy came at that point in time. That is why when they wanted to come for Atlantic slavery, the Jews were the ones supporting, especially the Zionists. You can understand. So, but that we are feeling today because our empires that were thriving in Africa were actually destroying our environment. Our people were actually displaced. So many people came from the royal background, especially Kunta Kinte. You heard about him. Example, Ayub Suleiman. You mentioned about Ayub Suleiman was a scholar. So Muslim participation in the Atlantic slavery was voluntary because if they did not participate in the slavery to get resources, how would they be able to mobilize arms to protect themselves? So this is still in the memory, but we don't need any reparation from the West because we believe that the centers of slavery could be a place of reconciliation and memory now. But the memory will still be there so that they will be still embarrassed and they will know that they will actually be guilty of what they do, the havoc they've done against Africa. Because you can't quantify the damage done to African people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, such a great explanation. Yes, we can really recognize that even in the 60s and 70s in America, between the white American and also black American, there are still gaps that, such separate people. That we can see in one of the movie as well, called Till, that exposed the injustice towards even to the black children that actually just maybe doing such a nasty things to white women, but he got a very fatal punishment until even the perpetrator has never been tried by the tribunal system in the US. So anyway, one of our students, Ebrima Jata, he's also coming from Gambia, would like to maybe discuss or say something, please, Ebrima. You can unmute.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you, Doctor, for that insightful presentation. I will tend to do more of discussion, trying to contribute on what some of the things that Doctor have said pertaining to the impacts that the transnational slave trade has on Africa, especially West Africa. Things that looking at the historical background I have given, one of the things that had a lot of impacts was the political destabilization that the slave trade caused. So after what the slave trade left us was this fragmentation of different power vacuum in Africa that was not so consolidated over time. So people were dominating each other based on their 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 power dynamics. So which because a lot of this, brave and strong men from different societies were collected and taken to the United States. So that left other societies being weak and other societies having the opportunity to overpower others. So another thing that also can be looked at, it's the economic destabilization it made. They didn't just take slaves, but they also collected our natural resources, especially our golds, diamonds, which especially at the coast of Africa, we are very rich in that commodity. So, which after taking these things, the resources we are limited for some of these countries to start from. Even after independence was given to us, there was nothing that we could refer back and explore to contribute to our development state. So which is a huge impact. Doctors said something about the black man being a center of identity. As in our class that my professor is here, Dr. Bayu, we have explained this, trying to explore this thing extensively, especially when it comes to how the Christianity, in the context of Christianity and how it spread throughout the United States, and how Black people tend to make their place, not just Black people, but people of that are not white. That you have the Latin Americans, you have the Miso in the South America, Michu and others that were like tend to have a darker skin. It's not just this, and these people were believed to have descent from Africa that make their way to the Latin Americas. So to what the concept was is these people with their skin is dark because, like Doctor said, these are people that great sin, and they are caused by by divinity in whatever sense that was. So this was so crucial to look at how the concept of slavery and how it becomes institutionalized and carried out in Africa tend to look, it tend to have its roots to date. Uh, JJ also talked about how the Black Lives Matters really impacted the US. I think it's still a thing, and there's a lot of gaps and loopholes that are in the American society still that are not consolidated. Even though you have democratic models, you have a lot of integration that has gone from the independence to date, but there a lot of structural, imbalances within the system itself, which tend to, victimize Black people in the U.S. So I think these are some of the things that are interesting. I think uh, my hope was to if they have contacted me, I would have asked doctor to touch on areas of uh, the popular culture, which these things with I mean in the early 1960s emanated from the U.S., like the rock music, pop music, and so forth. How it impacted our societies, because in my class I was struggling to have references to prove to kind of make a connection, and how in comparison to Indonesia and other civilizations, how popular cultures that emanated from the US impacted their societies. Like rock music here was in the 60s and the 50s was very much influential in their socio-political dynamics. But I have little or no insight into how those popular cultures ways in our society. So I think this is something that I think even if you have the opportunity next to have Doctor, I would love Doctor to give us an insights on those areas. Thank you for the time, Doctor. Back to JJ.
Okay, Dr. Toray, would you like to have or give some response to the Ebrima's explanations?
Yes, very important. He touched on very, very important and salient points with regards to concept of racial superiority, that is misconceptions that is led to perception. We need to understand that but most of the time, the black African themselves, what I would like to tell, some of all these concepts remain in Africa to the extent that Africans themselves, sometimes they undervalue themselves. They don't believe in themselves. Because let me tell you one thing here. When it comes to the racial discrimination and marginalization of Africa, it starts somewhere. Today in our schools, even today, we are still saying one proverb, the black sheep of the family. So concept of black sheep and your body is black. How will you consider black color and yourself? These are all something. But people need to understand that what the white man believes to understand. Africans are black naturally, and black is the first in the world. Because of the melanocytes content or the melanin content in their race, in their body. Africa was the first place where you could have only sunlight. All other places were in glass, no humanity. So that's why we say that Africa was the cradle of humanity. So we have to understand most of the time, white people believe in their scholars, and their scholars were actually writing in order for them to establish and maintain the concept of white superiority in response to their needs. But Sheikh Anta Diop in the 1960s was able to debunk most of these things. Sheikh Anta Diop wrote a book, African Origin of Civilization, Myth or Reality, Barbarism or Civilization, to actually give us an insight into who were the Africans, who were actually the Africans. And we have to understand, even in Islam, and sometimes we have some sub-racial group who believe that they were more close to Prophet Muhammad, and they believe that they are divine and they should be supported. Even the Moroccan king Mansour, who attacked the University of Timbuktu and Sankorin, he attacked the University of Sankorin in Timbuktu in West Africa because he believed that he came from the Rifian dynasty, that is from the line of Prophet Muhammad. But he destroyed an Islamic university and enslaved Muslims and slaughtered Muslim scholars in Mali. We need to actually change this in Mali. But the first continent that protect the refugees in Islam were the black Africans in Ethiopia. And the first king to accept Islam was black African king. So African people, you are never backbenchers in the religion of Islam. You are never. You were the people who protect Islamic refugees because you had all the political conditions, all the constitutional framework that actually generated human rights system which protects the right of the refugees. That is why the refugees of Islam were not actually extradited. I think black Africans need to look at all this. They contributed immensely in the global religious growth, like Islam and Christianity. We can understand. So Nagusa Nagasa of Ethiopia protect Muslim refugees. So we need to look at the history in order for us to restore our dignity, our honor, moral dignity and honor. So, but it has to go side by side with the knowledge pursuit, and we actually control technology so that we can be co-equal in the world system. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Turai. I think our lecturer and head department, Bayu, will also want to discuss something. Please, Pak.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mas JJ. Yes, I've been so interested and so much immersed into your explanation that some of your statements really resonate with what I've learned and what I've taught in the class, especially with regard to the history of African people and African Americans in the US. One of them that struck me was your statement in which you said that the African people, when they were brought from Africa to the US at the time, they were stronger, they were more immune to the European diseases, in contrast to the Native Americans, the Indian people, who easily fell victim to European diseases. So my first question is with regard to what were the factors that made the African people at the time stronger in terms of immunity against European diseases in comparison to the native people in the US? Yeah. And I also learned that, like in the history of South Africa, that when the white European people came and they landed in Africa, they were only able to stay at the coast or the coastal areas, because when they wanted to venture further inland, they would be struck by diseases like malaria, for example. So that's why that's the reason why they tended to stay at the coastal areas because of that, right? But it's interesting you said that the African people were more immune, and that's the reason why Europeans enslaved them or made them slaves in the U.S., because they were able to survive in comparison to the Indian people. That's my first question. If I could ask the second question, I would like to know your perspective with regard to you mentioned before Black Christianity and also Nation of Islam. Yeah, I'm wondering, what do you think are the elements of African spirituality that have influenced the Nation of Islam or Black Islam in the U.S. as well as Black Christianity? Like, for example, we know that the Black Church is so much different from the other white denominations, like in the way they worship, the way they sing, the way the songs that they create. Yeah. But in your perspective as an African person scholar, what do you think are those elements of African spirituality that become strong elements of both Black Christianity and Islam, like the Nation of Islam in the US? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, in response to the difference in terms of physiological nature, understand that Africa was launching a center of knowledge. Not only that, but black people, you have to understand the physiological difference between black man and the white man. Our melanocytes, first of all, is very strong. That as a black man, my melanocytes, the melanin in black man is stronger than the white people. So that is why you can understand that environmentally we are able, in fact, we deflect sunlight that could not do compared to the white man. So also in Africa, everything there was very natural, and they understand that since they live in the nature and they were adopting and their diet and whatever, it gives them more their immune system was very, very strong. But this is actually has to do with genetics, because African melanocytes was stronger than any other racial group in the whole world. Our melanin, because you have to understand the first creation, African. And since Africa was the only place where sunlight, before the end of the glacial, warm glaciation, before the end of warm glaciation in Asia and Europe, Africa were already in the heat. So they built strong immune through the strengthening of melanin, through the sunlight, because that gave them the opportunity to give a genetic immune system compared to the other racial groups. And that's why they live in Africa. The second one, let me tell you, Africa was a center of divinity and spirituality. You can understand that we discovered God before anybody. We believe in that. Because if you look at the Memphis theology in ancient Egypt, built by the first pharaoh called Namer, he built a state based on the religion and belief system. They believe that the Almighty God built this world not with his hand or with any other thing. The Almighty God built this world by his chest, through his heart and his tongue. So metaphorically, African belief system during the time of the Memphis, as first people in the world, they believe that God built this world through his heart and his tongue. And Islam look at that, they say, when in the chest or in the heart, which means whatever you desire. And the tongue will say that be, it is be. That is equivalent to the kun fayakun. It has been rooted in Africa since the time of the first pharaoh who built the state of Memphis on the pharaohs. And this is what they believe in. That's why monotheism in the ancient Egypt was so right. It was later Ramses and others, they tried to actually bastardize religion there and monotheism. It was already in their system. Because if Pharaoh, one of the pharaohs, Moses was before the Ramses, told Pharaoh, go and tell your Jewish people to stop worshiping objects. Look at the Nile Valley. It will come this season and plants will come, and they will die another season, which means there is next fall when we die. So already spirituality was actually part of Africans, and they understand God. But the Christianity brought to them is to show them white Jesus. Actually, and they use white Jesus revelation to enslave them. How could they believe? And how could they justify the religion they brought to them? That is giving them the opportunity to enslave them. So this is one of the basis of the rejection of the white Christianity. And they adopted. That's why the Jamaicans say that. The Jamaicans are always saying that we will not listen to the message of the devil from the majesty. That's why they link Haile Selassie's eye to Ethiopia, and where they believe that they were the first people, and they believe in the Haile Selassie eye as one of the prophets. In comparison to Jesus, the Jamaicans rejected white Jesus. They accepted Haile Selassie eye, not so, as their own Jesus. So that because of the slave experience during the slavery, they had the Bible and they enslaved them, and they refused Africans to learn. So how could they justify? So they don't believe in white Christianity, and the white man is showing them Jesus as white person, and they believe that white man is a devil. So they created their own independent church, and they actually created their own divinity and divine party. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
for
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Torai, for your explanations. So I think we can give one more opportunity. I think the last opportunity for the participants or our students who would like to ask or maybe discuss something with Dr. Torai. Is there anyone else?
Sorry, I failed to respond one thing.
Okay.
That is Islam.
Please.
Yeah, that is Islam. Understand that many of the people coming from Africa, many slaves were Muslims, and some of them were literate in Arabic. And in fact, in some of their memories, they could find some of the Islamic songs from the Majlis. Already there were established Majlis, because Timbuktu as a school was established. Already schools were established in the West Africa since the 12th century. Major Islamic centers and learning. So you could see some of them went with Islamic knowledge, with whatever. And then some of them were Muslims. So what happened when you come to the nation of Islam, taking a pathway, is that they understand that it is only Islam, and that actually didn't actually come with the using Quran as a justification for enslavement. And they also believe in the ancestry of Prophet Muhammad, especially when it comes to maternity of Ismail. Ismail was born by Hajara, a woman from ancient Egypt. They call it black stone because of her color. This woman became subservient to Abraham, one of the great prophets of God, and they created the sacred principle of Mecca. All this historical memory drifted these people to believe that it's Islam that is the religion of the black people. That's why a nation of Islam was actually created. When after Farad Muhammad came, Islam was introduced. And we also believe in the divine intervention of God. And we believe in sainthood. So Farad Muhammad went to America, spoke to Elijah Muhammad. Within 3 years, he actually imbued the spirit of knowledge in Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah Muhammad became a person who used, that is the divine or intercessory power given to him by God to actually convert the people. This kind of miracle actually also attracted people. And they believe in divine, and that was actually divine intervention, where they were able to show Islam and created an organization that built Islamic scholarship, Islamic centers, and model in their social and cultural life. So it is actually a kind of historical connection and divine intervention in their orientation that led to the creation, and it is there to counter that actually the Jews Zionism, controlling. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Torai. I think there is no students and participant who would like to ask. Oh, okay. There is one last question from our students. Almo, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mas JJ. Doctor, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ansa. I would like to ask two questions actually. During the slavery era, there was the belief of white man's burden. My questions are: do Western countries still believe in white man's burden in their actions toward other countries, or in their foreign policy? And second, how does this white man's burden belief affect the people in Gambia nowadays? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Please, sorry, can you please repeat your question?
Okay.
Can you please?
During the slavery era, there was the belief of white man's burden. My questions are: the first one is, do Western countries still believe in white man's burden in their action towards other countries? And the second one is, how does this belief affect the people in Gambia nowadays? Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, the white man created a kind of a system. That is where you can understand, and they are conscious of their burden on the, and it was actually invented deliberately in order to create global categories, not so, between the nation states and the continental zone. In the first place, when white man needed human capital from Africa, they came and took them into any form of human feeling. When white man actually wanted, when they were expelled from America, and they could not get any other alternative avenue where they could get natural resources for industrial development in Europe, they came and compete for control of African sphere and African zone. And not only that, they could establish their hegemony and political hegemony. They dictate policies so that they dictate what type of economic system that they will institute according to their industrial demand in Europe. This led to African shift from the cultivation of rice. So you can see the burden on them. They impose peanuts on these people. So white man actually created a kind of global interdependence in which they were the one dictating all into their technological sophistication. So once Africa became a consumer zone and producers of the raw material, the African people were only consumers, and Africa became periphery of the world system because Africa could not actually manipulate or generate a condition where they would be co-equal in the world system to dictate policies. So today Africans are subjects. So in the global system and global socio-political context, in that relationship, European countries are the core and we are periphery. So we are, our own rice in the Gambia is being produced, is imported, all into the colonial economic system that left us with nothing, even a condition to build technology in order to actually internally we could produce our own things. So this is where we can understand still now people are conscious of this body. And then African continents, African states are being controlled all into what? All into the loans or indebtedness now. Our country is billions of dollars. So our budgetary allocation, about half of it is going to the debt servicing. And we could not actually industrialize because no surplus. We remain to actually collect debt, and we remain to be targeted, and we remain to be periphery of the world system. And we will be used as market for Western capitalist factories. We could not generate our own to any condition for industrialization for ourselves. So a kind of continuity, but it has to be understood within the context of history and historical development. And people are actually conscious of that in Africa too. And today, those young Africans, especially non-African capitalist personalities, but the African personalities in politics, are very, very conscious of this. At this point in time, we have seen political change in Senegal. The young people came up with a very dynamic, strong political force to understand Western manipulation through France intervention in their political space, which is costing them actually to deplete resources for France. Now they are coming out to challenge their government that actually was aligned with France. They end the mandate of that government. Now the new government is going to actually spearhead the sovereign state state status of the Senegalese people. So you can understand in Mali, they are conscious of it now. In Niger, France manipulation and exploitation. So we are coming up. Young generation are conscious of this. They are reading the histories. Now they are connected to others. At the end of the day, we are gradually moving to actual exterminate Western capitalist manipulation in Africa, so that we can create monetary zones and generate economic independence for our people and restore our moral dignity.
Okay, Dr. Turai, I think that's all. Are you satisfied with the explanation?
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you.
it's echoing. All right, Dr. Turai, I think we have reached to the end of our mini discussion, since a lot of our students has already maybe they're breaking their fasting, and during that we are enjoying the explanation and the discussion between each other. And maybe before we end our discussion, I would like to give to the our head of department, Dr. Bayu Kristianto, to give thanking words, and also yes, Pak Bayu, please go ahead, Pak.
Okay. Thank you again for the opportunity, Mas JJ. So, as head of the department, the American Studies Department at the School of Strategic and Global Studies, I would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Ensa Ture for giving us so much enlightenment in the past 2 hours with regard to the history of transatlantic slave trade, as well as the story about the survival of African nations and the dynamics that have happened throughout history with regard to these different African nations, vis-a-vis or in encountering the colonization, from the Western world. Okay, so thank you so much again for sharing with us the perspective from Africans and from an African scholar such as you, that has a lot of expertise on this subject. So we really appreciate your presence with us, your explanation. So now we'd like to give you this a digital certificate, presented to us from the School of Strategic and Global Studies. The director is Mr. Ator Suproto, but unfortunately he was not able to come, so I'm representing him as the head of the American Studies program. So here we are presenting this certificate to you as a token of our appreciation and our great gratitude. Again, thank you so much for having been present here and for sharing your insights and knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Ensa Turai, again, we are thanking you very much for all the knowledge that you shared to us. It is such an honor for us and for our students and all the participants on behalf of our School of Strategic and Global Studies. Again, I reiterate our thanking you and also our gratitude to have you. And we are very sorry and apologize for any mistake maybe that maybe we have commit during our communication and until the holding of this event. So I hope that we can see you for another occasion, and maybe someday we could invite you to Indonesia to give a talk as well. So you can access the certificate through the chat box, and I will send you through the email, and maybe we'll give the hard copy to ISS. So again, thank you so much. Would you like to say something, Dr. Troy?
Yeah, I really appreciate this thing. I'm honored to, I actually appreciate this invitation. I honor this invitation because this is one of the most interesting global interaction that I have. Although I travel to many places, but this kind of through the virtual means, I have not been doing that. And since COVID-19, and after COVID, this is the first time, and I would like to thank you people for giving me the opportunity, and from the University of the Gambia to actually give this presentation. And I believe that I don't know everything, but anytime I am invited to share anything with you, I will appreciate it. Thank you so much for your invitation.
You are very much welcome, and we will post this event in our YouTube. So we will share it to you, so you can maybe download or share this to your friends and colleagues. Again, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and see you on another occasions. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor.
Bye-bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Mm.
Bye bye. Bye bye, Dr. Turai.
Yeah. Bye.